thing, just to make sure you're doing some reading. There'll be a role play station, like definitely. And they can vary hugely, but tend to find the scariest are like the Breaking Bad news ones, and we can kind of go over how to go about answering those as well. And then there are some, yeah, you might have some a graph or some data and ask you to interpret. Some where you have to like prioritize tasks, and this isn't like normal prioritizing tasks. You'll be like stuck in a petrol station, and the whole world will be like some old lady will have slipped over in aisle 5 over and spilled a hot drink on herself, and like the petrol station's also on fire, but your boss is missing or something. So you'll kind of have to take the information into account and sort of talk to order you deal with these things in. And to be fair, these can be quite difficult just because you have to think it all through on the spot, and 10 minutes is actually not a long time just of to then go through what order you deal with them in. So actually time pressure is another kind of con of MMIs. Data that you really like, you're really getting into, you might just get cut off in the middle of it. So yeah, those are like some. There are still skills, like standard Panely type questions as well that get thrown in. But those tend to be the main types that will come up in an MMI. So interviews, the one thing actually when I'm tutoring that I always like is always the first thing I end up pointing out is once you finish an answer, just finish it there. Like the number of people that will finish their answer, and especially in an MMI where that's the end of, once you've finished your answer, that's the end of the station. They might ask you one or two questions on it. So whereas in a panel you'd get them to they'd keep asking questions and you wouldn't have time to sit there and think about what you'd last said. And you can be sat there for like 3 or 4 minutes depending on how quickly you answered and just like thinking about what you've said, and it looks not really bad, but it doesn't look great when you then go back and try and change parts of your answer. Like it's a much better look to just finish confidently and be going out and picking a part that you've made, because a lot of the time interviewers won't have, and this stands for like going back and correcting yourself as well. So a lot of the time interviewers won't have picked up on little things, like especially things that are just like stuff. Granted, if it's something that's like massively factually incorrect, then go back and correct it. That's fine. But if it's just, oh, I didn't like the way I worded that, or oh, maybe I could have made that argument better by doing this, don't go back and change it, because however many people that day, like probably they'll probably have gone through about 30 or call that session. They won't be paying that close attention to the point where they're like picking it apart word by word. So if you go back, going up like a massive neon sign going, oh, like mark me down for this, this, and this. So it's much better to just sort of finish strong and just leave it there. And then in terms of what else is there? It's usually so a lot of places will give you a little bit beforehand in MMIs to plan. So if I go through, so Nottingham gave us 90 seconds to read over the scenario before we even got into the station, and then there was like another copy of the scenario once we were St George's, which is another one I applied to, gave us 15 seconds to move from one station to the next, but and then Kings had 60 seconds to move and have a little went into the station again. So it kind of varies, but use that time to plan out in your head, rather than going into massive detail about the points you want to make. Just have a rough idea of the point and have like how you'd go about explaining just in your head, so that once you go in, you know what points you're going to make, you can make them, explain them, and then be done with it. So example. Okay, so let's start with like, does anyone have any questions so far actually, before I go diving into like minutiae of things? Okay, I'll say no. In terms of like general skills questions, so there'll be things like tell us about a time when you good team working skills, or tell us why leadership is important in medicine, or stuff like that. You can use pretty much the same structure for every single one of those questions. A structure that's a good idea to like use in your personal statement as well. In terms of linking it to or your application. So you can say, look, so when I was on work experience, let's say skills up here. So this is one thing that's really good to do actually is work experience. If you haven't done this, is like a good idea of things to be thinking about while you're on it. And if you have done it, just try and think back. But think about your work experience and think, when did I see examples of skills of like leadership, teamwork, and stuff like that? And have an example. When you get to this question, when they say, show us an example of when you showed these skills, then you can say, okay, here's an example. So you can put like example of when you showed it. You don't want that to be the end of it. You kind of want to show them that you're aware that these are skills that you'll never be like completely. And so you want to show them that it's something that you're continuing to work on as well. So your next point, after you've given your example of when you've used it, is you can say is to talk a little bit about like, so well, a really good way to do this, so they absolutely like lap up, is to go on reflection of this, of blah blah blah, of that scenario that you used above. Point out something that's like something that didn't go too well, something that you think could have been improved. And then what that means is that you're showing not only have you used these skills, but you are capable of reflecting on them, identifying things that can be improved in the future. And then the next day, and so this is how I've been working on improving said skill or whatever you've identified. So how you've been improving point identified. And so at that point, what you've done is said, like, here's my example of when I've shown it. Here's something that could to improve that, so that next time I do it, that's not the same. Like, we don't have the same problem. And then finally, you can say, and you can say, and I know this is really important in medicine because when I was on my work experience, I saw that. So say when you saw the skill being used, I saw this skill being used in this way when I was like in the GP surgery or in the hospital. And so what you've done there, used in work experience. Okay, so what you've done there is you basically said, like, here's a skill you're asking about, here's how I've got it, here's what I'm doing to improve it, here's why I know it's important to have in medicine. And you will probably, to go through each of those points and structuring your answer like that, is you've probably answered all the extra questions that they would have given you at the end. Because a lot of the time, the things that follow that are, how do you think that scenario could have gone better? How have you been improving your skill? Why do you think it's important in medicine? And those tend to be like the 3 standard follow-ups to skills questions. So by just answering your question like that, you can like stop them from having to answer ask any extra questions, which they'll like, because it will show like an awareness of what they're looking for. And then you can kind of finish on that. You don't have to worry about them throwing out any dodgy questions, and it's just sort of, and this doesn't just work for, and this will like work for all the skills as well. So you can just insert leadership, teamwork, empathy. So if you go in with those examples of when you sort of like times when you've seen all of those skills used in your work experience and times when you've used them, as well as like what could have gone better in those times, you'll be absolutely fine with these questions. So, any questions about that? No? Okay. So, okay, let's do roleplay. Yeah. So, we'll say bad news. Because a lot of the time it does tend to be bad news, and it's the ones that everyone's really scared of. It's not, they're not looking for anything spectacular. Like, they're not looking for you to be able to do it with absolutely like no issues whatsoever. It will be a little bit awkward because also a lot of the times the situations they give you are just a bit dodgy. Like, on holiday and you somehow run over his goldfish. Like, you're probably never going to get in that situation anyway. So tackling it in a realistic way probably won't. Like, yeah. So in terms of actually doing it, I think one thing to emphasize is if in the brief they tell you that something is your fault, then please own up to it being your fault. Like, there's absolutely nothing wrong with going, okay, let's take that example. So let's say you like run over your neighbour's pet. If you do the station by going, so like knocking on their door, ask how they are, blah, blah, blah. Say, look, I'm really sorry, but I have some bad news for you. I'm afraid while I was, I don't know, backing out of my drive, and I took them straight to the vet, but I'm sorry to say they died. Then what you've done is you've accepted responsibility for it, which is one of the big things they want you to do in these bad news situations, where like you've done something wrong, is they want to see if you can take responsibility or whether you'll just try and pass the buck and try and make out like it wasn't your fault. So if you'd gone, in the middle of the road, and I don't know who it was, but they were just there, and I tried my best and I gave them like doggy CPR or something, but that was it. Then that was a really bad look, and the interview. So definitely go for telling the truth over anything else. It's also much. I can't speak for like all patients, but I think in general with the briefs they're given, off the handle in like rage or just sadness if you tell them the truth. A lot of like I've seen some of these briefings, and a lot of the time the candidate tries to skirt around the issue, then get progressively more annoyed or progressively sadder, and it becomes a lot more difficult for you as well, rather than just coming out and saying it. But yeah, taking responsibilities. Another thing that's worth, and this is something they don't really teach you until you get into medical school, and so it's not something they're expecting you to know. But it's a really good idea to like fire a warning shot. Is if you're going to give someone bad news, just warn them you're going to give them bad news first. So like when I was doing that example, I said like I kind of used the two-pronged one. So I said at which point they already know something like bad's about to happen. To have to tell you dot dot dot, or you can say like but I have some bad news, something like that, something that will brace them for the fact that's going to make them sad or angry. And that's always a really good idea as well. It's like a good technique to get into. In general, breaking bad news, like there's some things you can't help here in a station in terms of like setting. I suppose you could. You can say like, do you want to go? So you could say quiet. Do you want to take a seat? Make sure they're like sitting down. Stuff like that. Stuff that's like just general being a nice person. And look around the station for cues as well. Like if they've got tissues on the table somewhere, then them straight away. Then it will just look a bit sort of bait that that they're going to start crying and stuff like that. But be aware that they're there just in case they do. Also, some of these actors are really good, like really good. I've been astounded at some of them, but some of them are like you'll be sat there thinking, "What the hell are you doing?" But some of them are very good. So if they do start crying stuff too much, like it's just they're very good at their job. So yeah, with bad news, that is if something's your fault, take responsibility, and it won't always be like something's died. Like, that's always the extreme. So for mine, it was at Nottingham. What was it? That I was working at a restaurant and I'd messed up a table reservation for like a big party, and so, and I didn't have the table and I had to explain to them. And again, like they were a bit annoyed. And so, or as you would be. So the first thing was obviously like taking responsibility, then telling them what the bad news was. And then there will be some stuff where you can't fix it. For example, death. But yes, to say you'll do what you can. So give them. Don't do it in a way that makes it look like you're just trying to escape from the situation, even though that is definitely what every like cell in your body will be screaming at you, which is do it in a way that is like a helpful way. So for mine, I was like, oh, I'm really sorry, I don't have your table right now, but if you can wait for 15 minutes, then we can see if we can get another table opened up, push them together, and we'll make sure you're the next people seated. And obviously, that's fine, because you've got like you've got 7 minutes left on station. So obviously they were still like, no, but I made a reservation, and at that point, I go, yeah, I know, I'm really sorry, it was definitely my fault. And again, give them other things. Be like, look, we can give you your meal on the house, and I know it won't make up for it, but it's just something to show as like a token of our apology. So it's something where you're not trying to pass the buck as such, or like trying to completely ignore the situation. It's something where you're acknowledging the situation, but saying how it can be made better as well. So obviously, if you've killed someone's pet, you can't go, I'll buy you a new beagle, because that just looks a bit insensitive. But it can be things like maybe, okay, it might not be the best thing to bring up, but you can talk about like paying for like a tribute or donating to a charity or something for them. Just doing something to help them, essentially. Say, like, if you need any help with anything, I know I might not be the first person you'd call, but I'm here. Things like that. Things that show you're aware of the situation, you're aware of the context, but you're still. So yeah, that's role plays with like breaking bad news. Any questions about that? Sound? Cool. So then we had, what else do we have? Oh, we had ethics. Big one actually, because you know your structure, and you also know everyone else going to that station, so you have exactly the same structure. So there are 4 pillars, which are beneficence, non-maleficence. please learn to get these right all around before your interview. Like, if you go in and say, I'm going to use the pillars of like beneficence, non-beneficence, and then you said the same, well, not the same thing, you've actually contradicted yourself, but they're confused. Oh, I've just written it down now. Well, try and get your head around them. So maleficence, 3. Justice, we'll put justice at the end actually. Beneficence, non-beneficence, beneficence. Oh, actually, what is the 4th one? I'm having a complete mind blank. Beneficence, non-beneficence, autonomy. That's it. So autonomy and justice. Beneficence is like doing what's in the best interests of the patient. Non-maleficence is sort of not doing harm to them, so making sure that what you're doing isn't going to hurt them. And there's actually 2 ways to think about that. So you can actually, so both of these can be thought of in terms of physical and mental health. So something that's really good for someone's physical and mental health, and vice versa. So that's a sort of thing, something to weigh up and is worth considering when you do these. It's just the fact that they have the right to decide what treatment. So basically, they decide what to do with their body. So that doesn't mean that they can demand treatment. So you're still there. Like, the way it works is you're still there to offer them the treatment options, but it's up to them to choose one of them. They can't put on the table in the first place. What to do with that info? Sorry, with their body. And then justice is really wishy-washy. It's kind of that you don't discriminate based on like, it's basically fair treatment for everyone. It's a good way to put it. discriminate based on someone's like job, someone's like race, or see now class, previous medical history, things like that. But for some things, those are things that you need to take into account, especially like previous medical history. So obviously, you're not going to give like so that's where it gets a little bit wishy-washy. But essentially, if you every ethics really like signpost and say exactly what you're going to say. So if they give you an ethics question, sit down and say, look, it's an ethics question, so I can address this: beneficence, non-maleficence, autonomy, and justice. And then you can go through each of them and say, in like from the point of view of beneficence, non-maleficence, same thing. And for these, it's just a really good idea things in terms of both sides of an argument. Like there's nothing worse than going in and just giving like a really one-sided argument to everything, because that's the point of ethics. You're supposed to like think of both sides of it. And actually, that's like a good way to think of for like anything in the interview is if you can give a balanced argument, then they all look upon that a lot more favorably than you coming to a like firm answer really quickly. Because a lot of the time what they're looking for is multiple points of evidence to synthesize it all into one final decision. And a lot of the time it doesn't actually matter what that decision is. It can like they don't care whether you'll give someone a liver or not, because they know that it takes more than one person. And actually, this is something with ethics decisions. It will take more than one person so to make a decision. So you can actually say you'd consult colleagues. The absolute best low-key cop-out is saying you'd consult an ethics board. So just people that convene to discuss these cases for hours on end. So you can just give your case to them and they'll help you out with it. But yeah, as long as a lot of the time it doesn't matter what the end product of your okay, sometimes it does. If you're going to do something that's blatantly against the law, then they won't like that. So if it comes out, if it's like a euthanasia question, and you say, yeah, I'd definitely help this person end their life, then that'll be a massive red herring because that's illegal. So you can't do anything against the law. But aside from that, if it's within the law and it's reasonable, then as long as you sort of reason through your answer, consider both sides of an argument, it doesn't matter what sort of way you come out with it. They're looking more at the process of how you come to that decision rather than the actual decision you come to. So yeah, ethics, I think the best advice for ethics questions is just be really structured in how you answer them, because it's so yourself and just end up going round and round in circles for no apparent reason. Because you've forgotten what you've said, and then you end up repeating the same thing because you've forgotten that you said it. If you like a structural autonomy, then beneficence, and you know what you talked about, you know what you haven't, and you'll be absolutely fine. But yeah, those are quite easy to practice. You've got slides. There's a couple ones that will have loads of ethics questions for you to consider. So that's worth. Those are definitely worth practicing. There's that. In terms of, there are some dodgy questions where they're like, oh, you're a work experience student and you see thing. So there's some about like knowing what your remit is. So basically what that means is like what is within your capability, what isn't. So it'll be a question like, you're on work experience and a doctor asks you to examine a lump on a patient. The patient doesn't look comfortable. What do you do? It's not, you're not in a, especially because the patient hasn't given consent, or they look like they won't give consent. So first of all, you need to like expressly ask them. But even if they look uncomfortable, it's not, and say, look, in that situation, I'd remove myself from that. I want to say situation again, but I don't want to say that twice. But you'd remove yourself from that situation. And then this helps with the UCAT actually as well, is knowing when people of like a senior rank and when to just take it up yourself. So a good rule of thumb, this doesn't always apply, but a good rule of thumb in general is just think that if you think it yourself, or you can at least start sorting it yourself, then do that. Because the people at like the level above will always be quite. If you see someone doing something inappropriate, but it's not like the most inappropriate thing, like I don't know, they have like writing down notes on an unsecured like computer, or they're not disposing of like the notes they write properly, then it's something. Okay, maybe not disposed, but you see them doing it, writing down notes on an unsecured. So you can just say, look, I'd say to them, can you like you shouldn't be doing that. Make sure you don't in the future. Blah blah blah. It's only then if it's something that has implications that need to be acted on further, warned about it before, then you should probably involve the people a level up. So if like it's someone who tells you that they left some notes on a bus somewhere, then automatically that's something that needs to be addressed further for these people's like data, and it needs to be acted on. And so at that point, you'd have to report it to someone higher up. But going straight to the person higher up answer to something, especially if it's something that you can sort of sort out. So yeah, kind of know your remit, know what's within your capabilities, and what. What else did we say? Data interpretation. The best way to do that is probably just to prepare for like A-level questions, to be honest. Like if you can answer an A-level question on a graph, then all you need to be able to do, if they give you what's happening, or they might ask you for like what you think's going on behind it, what the explanation is. They'll possibly is it a physiological, so they might give. I think in one of mine I got a graph showing like blood sugar and the effect of insulin and stuff, and I just asked to explain it. So have a good idea, like principles. But yeah, data interpretation can be a bit hit and miss. Like they can give you some really difficult stuff, like train. Doesn't happen often, but I think it has happened to some people. So that's when like the fact that it's an MMI really helps, because even if you absolutely fluff up that station, it doesn't affect the rest of them. You just kind of need to put it behind you and move on and just get on with the rest of them. And depression, you're thinking, surely there's no way to do it in this amount of time. A lot of the time, there is a way to do it, but it's not a way that they're expecting everyone to get. What they're looking for more is, can you kind of stay calm under pressure, as opposed to can everyone complete the task? Obviously, if you complete the task, but if you can do it in like a logical, well-reasoned way and just work your way through the amount of time, the fact that the way you've gone about it has been correct will account for a lot more than panicking. And so in general, try and stay calm, which I know is easier said than done in an interview, but it's something to do. Okay, and then medical news. So have a paper that you've read. It doesn't have to be anything particularly fancy. Like pick something that you can expand on quite well as well. So I did mine on like using machine learning and on like it was an article about using machine learning and AI, which was very helpful because it meant that I was open to not only expand on the article, then expand on this could be a future and the pros and cons of it. It was one tiny like sort of 3/4 of a page long article that I could then fluff up with absolutely loads of just extra stuff on like off the top of my head to get in there. So it's a lot, something like that where it has implications on the future will be a lot easier to talk about in terms of like pros and cons and things worth considering. But yeah, it is a question that comes up quite a lot. So just have an article that you read in mind that you can talk about. Most of the main types of questions. Does anyone have any questions in particular? No, I'll assume that's a no. Okay, cool. I know it's a bit early for this, but thought it might be worth doing anyway since we're doing all of this. If people are up for it, I might do a similar one, maybe with like some practice examples a bit later on. Sort of September, October time when it actually comes season. But yeah, if anyone has any questions in the meantime, feel free to message, and I will get back to you. Cool. Okay, bye.